Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk. Today's topic is going to be how would you make that? And this actually came from a customer. There are some sample drawings I'll show you. This is one of those, and he was like, I don't even know where to start. So I thought this would be kind of a cool example of, how would I approach this? And I actually have a couple other examples also that I'm going to bring up if we have time permitting. Let me start out by saying I hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas break and New Year's. I have Angelo helping me out on the Q&A today. So let's dive right in. I'm actually going to start out with something so back a couple of live streams ago, we were working on this pencil sharpener and we were doing these gears, and I was kind of complaining about how it was kind of difficult to figure out how many degrees when you come in here and you do a motion link. Let me capture my position here. And I click the two joints or whatever, like this guy and this guy. It's asking for an angle. And I was talking about how you kind of have to figure out and kind of tweak with it and play with it. And I'm going to give a shout out to our friend Blaze Barrett. He shot me an email and he's like, you can just type in the number of teeth and it'll figure it out automatically. And I was like, no, that's not true. And guess what? It actually is. So check this out. Here's just a quick example. So you can see I have a 24 tooth gear and I have a 6 tooth gear. And right now I don't have any motion link between the two. So I'm going to come in here, say motion link. It's going to ask for the two revolute joints. I'm going to click that guy and that guy. And you can see it kind of gives a quick little animated preview. So for this larger one, which was this Rev 1, I'm going to put in 6 teeth. And for the smaller one, I'm going to put in the 24 teeth. Let's reverse it, and instantly you'll see the animation updates accordingly. And I was blown away. I didn't know you could do this. So Blaze, and actually a couple other people mentioned this too in some of the comments. I can't remember all the names. So high five to all of you out there that knew this trick that I didn't know. I wanted to make sure I shared that with all of you. So all you have to do is type in the number of teeth. So I figured we'd start out with that cool tip. Give a thumbs up if you like that. So if you didn't know that, let us know in the comments, because I'll be honest, I didn't know it. So, okay. What we're going to do is we're going to create this part here, and the drawing, like I mentioned, there's a web page out there where a guy has a bunch of sample drawings. They're in a different language and stuff like that, and this was the drawing that the customer sent me. And unfortunately, I wouldn't say this is the best drawing out there. There's a lot of missing dimensions or some assumptions that we're going to have to make. So for example, this line right here, it doesn't say how, where it's located. So we're going to assume it's tangent with this circle here. You can see there's no vertical dimension over here, no vertical dimension over here. So as I was looking at this drawing, I'm like, man, how would you start this? And how would you figure this out? Well, if you kind of look at it, it's almost two separate bodies that are kind of connected together. And that's how I would approach this. So we're actually going to start by drawing this vertical section first. And then we're going to come back and we're going to create this horizontal section second. Okay. I've linked this drawing. I've linked my outline in the description of the video, so you'll have access to these. So I'm going to be referencing this drawing as we're going through. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to, first of all, make sure that my units are in millimeters for this one. So I just click on that little edit or change active units. We'll set it to millimeters. I like to create a new component. Even though it's a single part, I just like to get into the muscle memory of creating everything as components. So we'll call this part 214. I'll say okay. And now I have a component like so. We'll create a sketch. And I'm going to create it on the front plane. I kind of like to define everything on the front plane. And then we'll use the drawing. So let me jump back to the drawing here. So we're going to be creating this front view, or this vertical section here. I like to kind of pick something that's kind of my 0, 0 point. And so I'm going to pick this 30 millimeter diameter circle right here as my 0, 0. So I'll just go ahead and click there. We'll type in 30 for the circle, and there we go. I'll do another circle. Now this one's a radius, and so I'm just going to click somewhere like so. D for dimension, and you'll notice by default it's trying to do a diameter dimension, but if I right mouse click I can do my radius dimension. I've shown this in other live streams. So let's go ahead and make that 27 like so. And then looking at the drawing real quick, there's another circle down here. Again, it doesn't show like how far over from this circle it is. So we're gonna have to make some assumptions there. We're probably gonna have to wait until we get some other geometry built. We do know that it's 50 millimeters down. So I'm just gonna draw another circle kind of down here somewhere. And that is supposed to be a 24 millimeter diameter. And I know that it is 50 millimeters down. So that was pretty close, 53. So I'm going to type in 50. And now that circle is down in the correct location. Okay. So we kind of got the larger circle, the radius 27, the diameter 30, the diameter 24. Now what I want to start doing is creating the rest of this geometry here. And like I said, we're going to kind of make it into two separate parts that are kind of joined together. Again, I'm making an assumption that this line here is in line with the center of the circle. So I'm just going to kind of mock up this shape over here in Fusion. So using the line tool, I'm just going to get sort of close to vertical. I'm going to over exaggerate over here just so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm going to make sure I come straight down. I'll come straight over. I'll come up a little bit. And I'm just going to go to the left. I have no idea how far. And I'm just going to go up a little bit. I have no idea how far. We're just kind of mocking up the shape of the part. Okay. Now I want to obviously make sure that this thing is correct. So what I want to do is make sure that this line is in line with the center of the circle. So I'm going to click on that endpoint, say horizontal vertical, and I'll click on that endpoint there, and you can see that it moved over. It's changed color to say that that's fully constrained. Okay. We know the width of this little rectangular area is 56 millimeters. And then we know that the circle is 20 from the bottom. Okay, so we can use that information. So I'm going to put a dimension here. That is supposed to be 56 according to the drawing. Okay. And then I want this circle to be right in the middle of this rectangle. So check this out. I'm going to put in fact, I'm going to move this dimension down just a little bit like so. I'm going to put a dimension from here to this edge. And I'm going to place that dimension. Okay. Now what this allows me to do is I could type something in, or I can click on this dimension and you can see that it references it. So I just clicked on that 56, it referenced that dimension, and I could say I want this to be half of whatever that dimension is. So I'm going to say divided by 2. And you'll see that that circle moved over a little bit. And what's neat about this is, like, if I say make that 40, that's always going to stay in the center, because this formula is using whatever that number is divided by 2. So instead of me having to do the math or whatever, we'll let Fusion do the work for me. So if this was, 73.5 or something like that, that's going to figure out the correct formula, and that circle is always going to stay centered. So pretty cool trick that you can do math like that. I mentioned that this was 20 millimeters down, so I'll just bring that over here. We'll say 20, and now you can see we're starting to kind of define the location of this area. Now again, another assumption I'm making here is that this line is in line with the bottom of this 27 radius circle here. So let's do that. So basically it's going to be in line with that. So I could come in here and say I want this to be horizontal vertical with that point there, and you can see it moves that up, and so now that line is in line with that point there. Okay. The only thing I have left is this little guy right here, and again, according to the drawing, we don't really have any information about how far over that is or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this 145 millimeter radius and start building that, and then having that line connect to that radius. So let's go ahead and draw a circle, again, just kind of out here in space somewhere. I don't really care what size. Then I'm going to come back and dimension it. Right mouse click, and instead of diameter, I want it to be a radius. And it's going to be a pretty large radius, 145. And we can see it created a pretty large circle. Now, a tip that I like to do is I like to get the circle kind of where it's supposed to be. Not exactly. Like, I'm not going to try and get it to touch that circle right there. I'm just going to get it kind of like so. Maybe I'll grab this point, kind of bring it a little bit closer to where it needs to be. Okay. The reason for that is if I had left like this circle down here, and I said I want this circle to be tangent with this circle up here, it's actually going to snap it and make it tangent down in this area over here. So it's going to go the closest that it can. And so that's why it's better to kind of get it where it kind of sort of needs to be, like that. Okay. Then we can come in and say I want this circle to be tangent with this circle. And sure enough, we can see that that did that. Okay. And then I want this point, in fact, let me move this point down just so we can kind of see what's going on. I want this point to be coincident with this circle here. So I'm going to say coincident that with that, and we can see how it brought the circle down, and that point is now coincident with that circle. Well, the last thing is we can see that this height should be 16. So I'm going to throw that dimension on there. So let's throw a dimension on this edge right here and type in 16. And we can see that that circle is tangent there, and this is tangent there, or coincident there. And I want it to be, let's just say, in line with the center of this circle. So the last thing I'll do is a horizontal vertical. I'll say I want that point to be horizontal vertical with that point there, and you can see that sure enough everything has now turned black, which means that it's a constrained sketch. In fact, if I expand this guy open, we can see that little lock icon on my sketch means that Everything's locked down, so we're good to go. So it took me a little bit of effort to figure out, like, making assumptions, but you can kind of see as we came through, we lined things up. We used dimensions to define where things were located. Some of this stuff here, we just said make it in line with that point there, but we don't know what this length is. We knew what this length is, and we wanted to be in line with the center of that circle. Okay, so now I have the basic shape. Now I could come in and trim this circle in my sketch, but honestly, I don't really ever do that. I just like to come in, select my profiles, and we'll say extrude. Now this is a pretty symmetric part, so I'm going to change my direction to be symmetric. And what that means is it's going to extrude in both directions the same distance. It's going to keep my sketch kind of in the middle. When I do symmetric, you'll notice I get this measurement option, half length or whole length. I'm going to say whole length, and the overall distance is supposed to be 22. I'll say OK, and I now have that part created. It's got some filleted edges, so I'm going to select one of those edges and say fillet, 6 millimeters, again according to the drawing. I'm just going to go through and select the other ones, and you'll notice because I'm in the fillet command, it's only letting me, it's allowing me to probe through and click this edge without even having to rotate. So kind of a cool little trick. Okay, I'll go ahead and say OK. And if we look at our drawing real quick, we kind of have that part all created. We'll come back and we'll do the chamfers near the end or whatever. Okay, so the next thing is to kind of work on these little wings, whatever you want to call them. So we can kind of see this is more of a top view. We can see a 90-degree angle. There's a radius in here. These look like slots that are 44 millimeters wide, 10 in radius. So let's just go ahead and do that. Now, I'm going to create my sketch on this face right here. And the reason for that is that we're going to extrude up to this point, and it's going to kind of join everything together. I don't really have a flat face right here. I could create a plane at a point in a certain direction or whatever, but because I already have the plane right there, I'm just going to use this guy and say create sketch. And now we put a piece of paper on that face, and we'll go ahead and create a slot because that's kind of what the shape looks like. So I'm just going to click a couple points. I don't care what size right now. And let's go ahead and just do something like that. Okay. And now I can come in and dimension this guy. And you'll notice when you originally create the slot, it's asking for a diameter, but by doing this dimension, I can do a radius or I can do a diameter. So I have the option here. And according to the drawing, it's a radius. So I'm going to do a radius of 10, like that. I'm going to offset this guy. Oops, not D. Offset. Let me hit O for offset. Chain selection is turned on, so I'll go ahead and click that, and you'll see it's going to select all of the edges. And I can offset the 6 millimeters according to the drawing. So let me kind of move this so you can see it a little bit better. So if I come in here, we can see there's the radius of 10, and then we can kind of see that this is a radius of 16, so obviously an offset of 6 in that case. Then what I'm going to do is define where this slot is located. So let's go ahead, and you'll notice I haven't done the width, or I should say the length yet. We'll come back to that here in just a little bit. I'm going to create a circle. Let's look at the drawing real quick. I'm going to create a circle that kind of defines, you can see this radius 32, and it looks like it's going to be tangent with the slot there. So circle, I'm just going to draw it out here in space. I don't care what size. I know it's a radius. So when I dimension, I'm going to change it to a radius. And that is supposed to be a radius of 32, like so. And I'll kind of move it sort of where it needs to be, pretty close like that. Okay, now I want it to be touching this object, so I'll say tangent, I'll say there, and then you can see I can click on this line right here, and you'll see that it makes it tangent right there. And then I'll say I want it tangent from there to there. And now you can see if I were to move this circle, it's staying tangent along this edge here, and it's staying tangent to the edge of the slot. And because we haven't defined the size of the slot yet, the slot's actually growing and shrinking in size. Okay. I do know I need the arc to be a certain location. So we can see in this drawing right here that it's 89 millimeters from the front of the part and 32 millimeters up from the right side of the part. So let's go ahead and dimension this. So I'm going to throw a dimension from here. Now you'll notice it's not letting me pick this edge right here, and that is because we haven't projected any geometry, and this is a curved edge. If we were to rotate it, you can kind of see, sure enough, that's a curved edge, so there really isn't an edge there for us to pick. So before I can throw the dimension on there, I'm going to do P for project, and instead of doing just specified entities, I'm going to do the whole body, because really I kind of want like a silhouette of this whole thing. And you'll notice the different results. Notice when I do the specified entities, it doesn't really highlight this edge. But when I click on bodies and I hover over, you can kind of see that edge appear. So it's almost like a silhouette projection. So you will get different results depending on what you click. And sure enough, I can now see that edge there, which should let me dimension this direction. We want that to be 89, and I think that's all I need to do. And yeah, radius 32, which we did. Yep, I'm just checking my notes, making sure I'm doing everything okay. We did the tangencies. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is we're going to end up mirroring this thing. So let me throw a dimension on the width of the slot. Actually, you know what? Let's do that later. Let's just go ahead and do the mirror here. So what I want to do is I want to mirror it halfway across. And so I need a line, a mirror line that I can use. So I'm just going to click on my line command. Now I want it to be a construction line. So I'm just going to come over here and click construction. And then you'll notice as I get near the center of that line, it kind of snaps automatically. And we can see that that's a construction line. I'm going to come over here and it's going to snap to the midpoint there. And we can see that we just created a construction line. So you can toggle this on or off if you don't want it to be object line. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off, and now it'd be just a regular line. If I toggle that on, you can see it's going to be construction geometry. Cool little tip. Okay, so I now have this line that goes across. We can come in here and say we want to create a mirror. And I want to mirror all of this information, including this circle here. So here's a little bit of a trick. If I try and draw a box like this, you'll notice, for example, it grabbed this object line right here, and not a big deal. Probably won't matter in this case, but sometimes you don't want it to select that, okay? But if I drew it down here and went like so, you'll notice it didn't select that circle, which I do want. However, if I come from, instead of left to right, I go from right to left, you'll notice it's doing a different window, and this is called a crossing window. So it's going to select anything inside the window and anything that was being crossed by the window. And you'll notice that it gets all that geometry, including this circle, but it did not grab that extra little line right there. So again, quick review, if I do from left to right, it's going to grab extra geometry that I really don't want in this case. But if I go right to left, it's going to do a crossing window. And it's going to select everything inside of it and anything that that window was crossing. Now I can specify this construction line as my mirror line, so I'll click on that, and we can sure enough see that that's going to mirror across to the other side. And let's take a look at the drawing real quick. So this was 44, so I'm going to come in and dimension that. So let me just throw a dimension on this line right here. We'll say make that 44, and you'll notice because it's mirrored, this updated also. And that's kind of why I waited till after we mirrored, just so you can kind of see whatever you change on one side changes on the mirrored side also. Okay, moving on here, we're kind of getting the overall shape. The last thing I want to do is to create this shape here, and I can see that it's 90-degree lines. They look like they're tangent to the slots. And then there's a radius 16 right there. So let's jump back in here. I'm going to use this cool little trick where if I just get near the edge and I click and hold, you'll see it's going to create a tangent constraint for me automatically. So I'm just going to get sort of close to where I need to go, right there. And then all I have to do is get near this edge and move along it until I see that tangent icon appear. And you can see right there, I'll go ahead and click, and it created the tangent constraint for me automatically. Now I want this to be perpendicular with each other, so I'll come in here and do a perpendicular constraint, that line and that line. And you'll see it kind of changed a little bit. And then I want this point to be in line with the center of the part. So I'll say horizontal vertical, that guy there with that guy there, and you can see that it brought it down. Now, how come these are still blue? Well, if I grab this line, you can see I can move these slots tangentially up and down along that circle. Okay, so the last thing we need to do here is take a look at the drawing, and we can see that these slots are 120 millimeters apart. So I'm just using that dimension. So I'll throw a dimension from that edge there to that edge there. I'll go ahead and place it and tell it I want it to be 120 millimeters. And you'll notice that these turn black, which means they're constrained. Now you'll notice these stayed blue. This is actually an issue I turned into the development team, even though that's fully constrained and you can't change it. So if you end up getting these blue lines, we think it has something to do with the tangent. We're not 100% sure, but it is fully constrained. You can't change these or anything like that. So just FYI, if you're going through this, don't stress over those lines not fully constraining. Okay, so I pretty much have everything I need. I'm going to finish my sketch. Again, I don't really need to trim anything. I'm just going to grab the regions that I want, which are these regions right here. I'm going to rotate it so we're kind of looking at it from the top a little bit. I'll right click and say extrude, and I'll start to extrude. You can kind of see what this is going to do. Now, how far do I need to go? Well, I'm going to change the distance. I'm going to say to object. And all I have to do is get near this corner right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and click, and you're going to see it's going to extrude up to that point, to that object. I'll say OK. And it joined when I did that extrude. In fact, let me edit it again. You'll notice it says join. And so it's going to extrude, and because it's touching this vertical part, it's going to join them together. If I just said new body, it would have created a totally separate body, for example. So now they're joined together. You might also notice that in the drawing there's a radius back here, and I could have drawn that in the sketch, but I'd much rather keep my sketch simple. Come in here and say, okay, let's add the 16 millimeter fillet as an actual fillet feature, like so. That way I can come back and change it if I need to. So we've got the basics of the part done. The only last thing is to do these little grooves that you kind of see here. And again, I'm just kind of looking at the drawing. I can see that they're 5 millimeters deep, and they're spaced, 68 millimeters apart from each other. Okay, so I'm going to create a sketch on this top face right here. I'm just going to draw a rectangle. Again, I don't really care about what size. I'm just kind of doing something like so. We're going to use this to machine a little bit away. However, I need the spacing to be correct. So I'm going to do a dimension from this edge to the, let's just do the origin because that's right in the center. And I'll place it over here. And again, I'm going to use that math. Well, it's 68 total, and I want to go half of that. So I'm going to say divided by 2. And you'll see that it will, actually, yeah, I was pretty darn close. Let me undo. Let's do this. I'm going to bring this way down like so you can really kind of see what's happening here. So let me do that dimension one more time real quick. So I'm going to say 68 divided by 2, and you'll see that that rectangle kind of moves up, and now this line is exactly half of 68 from the origin. I don't really care about the size of this rectangle. I don't care that it's not fully constrained or anything like that. I could, dimension it if I want to, but in this case, I'm just using it as a reference. I also could just select this as my profile, but in reality, I like to select the whole thing, okay? And the reason for that is, what if there's a slight draft to these edges or this slot or whatever, and if I only do this, it could create little sliver faces or whatever. So I like to select all of the profile, almost like a cutter is going to be going back and forth, removing this material. I almost think about how is this going to be machined, for example. So we're going to extrude down in the negative direction. So we'll say -5. We want it to cut. Sure enough, we can see what that looks like. Okay. And there we go. Because we created this symmetrically, our origin is right in the middle of the part. You can kind of see that right here. As I rotate around, you can see that right there. So I have a mirror plane that I can use. So I could come in here and say, let's mirror. What do I want to mirror? I want to mirror the extrude feature. What's my mirror plane? I'll go ahead and click on this front plane you see right there. I'll say, okay, we just mirrored that extrude feature. Again, I kept my sketch simple. It's just one little rectangle. I could have done it over here and added more dimensions or whatever, but I was able to use the mirror command and mirror it. Okay, so the last thing I want to do here is, according to the drawings, is look at some of the chamfers. And so we can see that we've got 1 millimeter chamfers, and then we also have, I think it's in the notes, 1.5 by 45. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this edge and say chamfer. And you'll notice that it selects a bunch of lines because of this tangent chain. So I'm going to go ahead and select some other lines here. And you can see that I'm only having to click like one edge and it's selecting a bunch of edges all at the same time. So that tangent chain is really useful. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll grab this edge and this edge. But there's a couple edges that aren't chamfered, like this one here and this one here. So we'll leave that alone, and let's just type in 1. And you'll see that it's going to chamfer all of those edges for me at the same time, going all the way around. Pretty cool. I could also come in and add a new selection set. I'll go ahead and click on that edge there, that edge there, that edge there. And then I want to chamfer this edge and the one behind it. So I'm going to just grab the face, and it's going to grab all of the edges that have to do with that face. And let's just do 1.5. And you can see that it's going to chamfer those 1.5, and it's going to leave the other ones 1. And it's doing all of my chamfers in one feature in the timeline. So that's fairly new. We just recently added this, where it's very similar to the fillet command, where you can add selections into here and have them to be different sizes. You could even have them be different types, whether it's an equal distance or if it's a two distance angle, etc. Pretty cool. So that's it. That's how I went about creating this model. So hopefully that gives you some tips and tricks on how you would approach something that's like, man, where would you start? Break it down into its simplest forms. Sometimes it's as simple as rectangles and circles, and then you start, cutting, machining away, etc. So another one that came through the Facebook group was, how would you create this part? Now this looks really simple. I mean, it's a rectangle with an angled slot. And this one actually caused a lot of commotion on the Facebook group. They're like, oh, you could create surface lofts and do, this and that and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, it can't be that complicated. And in reality, it wasn't as simple as I expected it to be. So I'm going to show you how I came about creating this model. And I'd be curious if any of you have other methods, throw them in the chat window or try it out and maybe share it on the Facebook group or something like that. So basically, the important thing is this one dimension right here, this 1 5/16. That is where this hole is located on this edge. In fact, I actually grabbed this, let me bring my book up here. This actually came out of my old drafting book. You can see there's the part right there with the dimensions and everything like that. So you can kind of see that 1 5/16. So we're going to make it exact. I also picked this one because it has, dimensions like 5/16 and 1/16 and 5/8 and stuff. So we're going to do a cool trick with this. Let me bring up my drawing here. So, okay. So, like I said, that location of that hole is very important to me, and that's the key thing. So we're going to start a new design. I'm going to create a new component. We'll call it angle block. Angle block. Okay. I'll expand this open. I'm just going to create a sketch on the front plane. Do a rectangle. Now, I like to, again, keep things symmetric, so I'm going to do a center rectangle, and that way everything kind of comes from the middle. It needs to be 1 inch tall, and it needs to be 4 1/16 wide. But you'll notice I'm in decimal right now, 5.63. Well, check this out. I can type in 4 space 1/16. And it's going to figure that out for me automatically. So you can do, formulas, you can do fractions. You could even come in here and say, 4 1/16 plus, you know, let's just say 25 millimeters or something like that, and it's going to figure that out. And if I edit that dimension, it actually remembers those values in there. It's pretty cool. Didn't even have to change my units. So okay, so we set it back to 4 and 1/16. I'll say okay. Another tip I've shown before, I could say finish sketch, or I can just click on my profile, right mouse click, and I can extrude right from here, and I don't even have to hit the finish sketch. I'm going to keep it symmetric. Like I said, I like to kind of keep things symmetric. Now this is 2 and 9/16, so I'm going to say 2 9/16 for the whole length, and there we go. Okay, now I need to locate where that hole is going to be. So I'm going to put a sketch on this front face. We'll create a sketch. I'm just going to draw a construction line from top to the bottom, making sure it's vertical, like so. Okay, then I'm going to dimension it, and this is the important dimension I keep talking about. So this needs to be 1 5/16 over from the edge, and you're going to see it's going to push that line over. So this point is 1 5/16 from the edge of the part. Now I created this construction line to be able to define another plane in a certain direction. And to do that, we're going to say construct plane at an angle. And you'll notice it says line. So for example, I could click this edge here, and it's going to let me put a plane along that edge at any specific angle. Or I could come in here, plane at an angle. What's my line? Well, this construction line, excuse me, is my line. So I can go ahead and rotate, and you can see how it's going to rotate around that construction line. Well, we need it to be at 30 degrees according to the drawing. I'll go ahead and say OK. And I now have a construction plane at a very specific angle at a very specific point. So now I can come in here and create a sketch on that plane. Notice my view cube. I'm not looking straight at the front or at the left or whatever. We're looking straight at that piece of paper, like so. I can create my circle. Now you'll notice it doesn't seem to be snapping to that point. Be very aware. So if I were to click right here, am I at the correct location? The answer is no. I want to make sure I'm actually snapping right to that point. So I might have to do P for project. We'll go ahead and project the body. Now you can see that point is kind of highlighting right there. So if I do a circle, so that didn't do it. Okay, so let me go P for project. Let's project that edge instead of the body. Now if I do my circle, sure enough, we can see that it's snapping to that edge. So again, make sure that you're getting the result that you want. Okay, so I'm going to create a circle at this point. It needs to be 5/8 in diameter, so 5/8. We can see that that worked correctly. And then I need to do another circle. This one's a radius, so I don't know what size. So I'm going to do a dimension, a radius. And you'll notice that my dimension, let me go ahead and say 0.75. You'll notice that my dimension is vertical in this example here. And this kind of threw me for a loop. And I learned something new that I want to share with you. It's really hard to see, but you'll notice there's a green line right here, and there's a red line right here. And Angelo's shown this in the CAM workspace. you'll notice that there's a green line on the view cube, a red line. So that basically tells you which direction is the X direction, which is this way, and this is the Y direction. And so the text by default always tries to go along the X direction. So that's why it's going in this direction here. So again, don't let that worry you. It's just doing what it knows to do, is to go in the X direction. Okay, so I got those where I want. I'm gonna say finish sketch. I can now see the part. I'm going to click on my profile here, and again, I'm gonna grab everything here. So I'm gonna say profile. Let's grab that profile, and let's go ahead and grab this profile just in case. There's multiple profiles because we were we're cutting it in half with this projection line right there. Okay, now here's where it's going to get kind of weird. And this is kind of what threw me for a loop. I'm going to go ahead and say extrude, and we'll start extruding in that direction, and I can already see I missed something. I don't want it to cut, I want it to join. Okay, cool. It's taking that profile, and you can kind of see it's extruding it. Well, I want it to go flush with this face. So instead of a distance, I'm going to say to object. And I'll click on that face, and I get the result that I want. You can see it's taking that profile and it's extruding it at the correct angle to that face. But notice what's happening here at the front. Okay? I don't want all this extra stuff hanging off the front. And unfortunately, to object only goes in one direction. Now, if I came in here and said two sides, that lets me extrude like so. And if I say to object, you'll notice it doesn't let me click this front face, which is really weird. It lets me click points. So I'm going to click on that point, and you can see it's extruding to that point. So unfortunately, we can only do the to object in one direction. So how do I fix this? Well, what I ended up doing was saying, instead of starting at the profile, let's just offset maybe an inch. So what's cool about this, if you kind of think forward here, where this is exactly still in line with this point. And that's the important thing here, right? So I'm just going to offset my plane 1 inch. We're going to join that together. I'll say OK. Then I can come in here and say extrude one side. How far? To object. Click on that face. And we can see that, sure enough, it's still in the correct location. We'll join that together. We'll say OK. Let's turn our sketches back on so we can see that hole. And you can kind of see what we did here. So we kind of had to do it in 2 steps, but we now have this angle exactly where it needs to be. All we have left now is the, oops, let me do sorry. We select the profile here and that profile there. We're going to extrude. I like to start to extrude to kind of see what that looks like. I'm going to say, instead of distance, I'm going to say extrude all. And it's going to go all the way through the part in one direction. Okay, just like we ran into previously, it only goes in one direction, and you'll notice that there's like this weird little sliver going on here. So there's 2 different solutions you could do here. I could change it from 1 side to 2 sides, and then just bring this out a certain distance. Again, I can't say all. It throws an error. It doesn't like that for whatever reason. Okay, I can't say to object. It doesn't let me pick that front face. So I could do a distance like so. Or I could leave it one side and I could say, okay. Then I could just come in here and click that face and hit the delete key on my keyboard. And Fusion's gonna heal that geometry. And you can see it did add a delete feature into my timeline. And I kind of like this solution better because if I were to come and change like the width of this block, no matter what, that face always has to delete. Whereas if I had changed the extrude and did the two sides, for example, and I only came, you know, just far enough or whatever, but then we made the part bigger, this distance is going to stay right here and that weird sliver is going to show up again. So that's kind of why I like the delete face. Okay, I'm not going to finish the whole drawing here. It's pretty simple. You know, create two little rectangles and machine those through. Same thing with like the holes. I'll go ahead and do the holes. We can kind of see where those are located at. So I'll just show some tips and tricks with that. So I'm just going to click on a face and say hole. And I can position it where I want. Well, right here, you'll notice it says reference. And you can even see as I kind of hover over on these edges. So I'm going to click on that edge. And the hole needs to be 9/16. So I'm going to type in 9/16. You can see it kind of jump over. I'll go ahead and click on that one there. And it needs to be 1 in 9/30. You can see it kind of jump down there. Then I can come in and specify, you know, what kind, what size hole it is. So it's a 1/2 inch hole. I want it to go all the way through. So you can kind of see just by changing it to all, it goes all the way through. I'll say okay. And again, because I did this symmetrically, oops, I could come in here and say mirror. What feature? The whole feature. What's my mirror plane? That mirror plane right there. I'll say okay. And again, if I were to change the width of, or the length of this block, that hole is always going to stay in the correct location, and that one's always going to be mirrored symmetrically around it. So that's one of the reasons I like to do things symmetrically. Let's just, since we have a couple minutes, I'll go ahead and create a sketch here. I'll throw a rectangle on here and another rectangle over here. I could do that, or I could just throw a dimension on this guy, and he's supposed to be 3/8, so I'm going to say 3/8. This one is supposed to be 5/8, so I'll say 5/8. I can click on this and say extrude. Now here's another tip. I'm going to say go through all, and you'll notice nothing happened. But notice the direction the arrow is pointing. Well, right here it says flip, so I'm going to hit flip, and now it's going in the correct direction. So if you change it to all and you see nothing happen, just go ahead and hit this little flip icon. We'll say okay. I could mirror that guy. So I could say mirror, what's the feature? The extrude feature. What's my mirror plane? That front plane. I'll say okay, and we get that result. I could have drawn two rectangles and dimensioned them. I mean, there's many different ways that you could create this model. I like to use the mirror because if I end up changing the size of the model down the road, everything is going to kind of update accordingly, which is kind of cool. Okay, so that's that guy. We have a couple minutes. Let me bring up a couple more. This one I saw on the Facebook group, and I thought it was a really valid question. He had modeled a box that looked kind of like this. I'm assuming, maybe it hooks onto a belt and it holds a cell phone or a tool battery or something like that. And after he printed it, he wished that these arms were kind of at an angle a little bit instead of being straight out. Now, you could go back and edit the sketch potentially, but let's pretend that it wasn't modeled very good, or maybe it was imported from another CAD system. There was no sketch or timeline to edit. Okay, in fact, let's force that. I'm going to do not capture design history. We now have a model that has no information. But what I can do is come in here and say move. Now I don't want to move bodies, I want to move faces. Now let me show you what typically would happen here. People are like, okay, I want to move these faces. So they're going to draw a selection box around those faces. But notice where the rotate is. Well, I kind of want to rotate it more like over here, like along this blend, for example, or that fillet. So right here it says set pivot. So I'm going to click on set pivot, and then I might pick maybe like this top edge or this bottom edge right here. It really doesn't matter in this case. And you'll notice it's kind of like snapping to the midpoint, endpoints. Again, that doesn't really matter. I'm just clicking a point, and you have to come back here and say done. So I'm going to say done. Now watch what happens when I rotate. The front of the box rotates also. And this is not what you would expect. This is not what you're hoping for. Now we're able to rotate the arms, but I don't want the front to rotate. Why is the front rotating? Well, Fusion's trying to keep everything tangent, and I selected this front fillet. When I drew my selection box, it grabbed that. Okay, so let's try it a little bit differently. Let's right click and do the move command, and I'm going to, let's just try maybe doing something like this. I'm drawing a selection box. Oops, make sure you're on faces. I'm just going to draw a selection box like so. You'll notice what it's selected. Let's set my pivot again. I'll pick that exact same pivot point. Let's grab that arrow and notice the result I get now. Okay. Because I didn't select these front fillets, it's moving those faces, it's keeping those faces tangent, all that kind of stuff. But now I can come in here and say, go minus 15 degrees. Oh, 15 is too many. Let's just do 10 degrees or something like that. 7 degrees. Oops. And say OK. And we've now modified this model that it can clip on and be a little bit better. So hopefully that helps you out. Again, if you get a weird result, try selecting less faces. Okay, instead of doing a selection box like that, do a selection box more like this, for example. Or I might even try, I haven't tried this, let's try doing faces. Let's do the right to left and just do something like this. And you can see all the faces that it's selected. I'm curious if this is going to work. This is live, so we'll see. Yep, so that worked also. That might even be the best solution there, is to just do a crossing and saying, I only want really these faces here to move. I don't want any of these vertical faces or fillet faces to move. So that right to left crossing selection is a pretty cool trick. Okay, the last one, this was actually kind of a cool one. Have a customer, he designs speaker boxes, and he was asking, and he needs to create very realistic renderings. So, I was showing you could just do a very simple shape and add a material, a cut through material, and it'll simulate what this looks like. But he actually wants all the little shadows inside these holes and stuff like that. So how would I go about creating something like this that actually rolls around, is on a curved surface, rolls around another surface and continues on that direction? Well, the trick here is to use sheet metal. So I'm going to back up here And I'm just going to step through. So I created a sketch. Let me turn this guy on. Very simple sketch that kind of defined the top view of my speaker grill. Okay, then I used sheet metal in here to create a flange using that profile so it's the correct thickness, etc. Okay, then I unfolded it. So modify, unfold. I was able to pick one of those flat faces and it unfolds it flat. Created another sketch on that face, drew a, created a hole, then I patterned that hole, and you can see it goes all the way across. Then I created another kind of offset hole like so, patterned that to kind of get the triangular shape there. You can kind of see where I'm going with this. Then I patterned those two patterns up in that direction. And then finally, refold the faces. Now, again, this is pretty complex geometry, so you saw it took, a few seconds for it to do that, okay? So, anyways, that is how you would go about doing something like this. The sheet metal tool is a really kind of cool tool to do odd shapes like this. So, okay, with that, I hope you learned some tips and tricks on how would you approach, complex models, something that, missing dimensions, or where do I start? How do I create that angled hole, but I know it has to be a certain distance? And you just kind of have to think a little bit outside the box, kind of like what I did with that angled hole. We had to extrude two different directions, but I was able to make sure that that hole was in the correct location using the sketch. Tune in next week. Hopefully Angela will be doing a cam series. So I haven't asked him yet, so I don't mean to put him on the spot, but hopefully we'll do a cam series. I'm also coming up with a new series, kind of like what we did with the pencil sharpener. It's going to be a multi-part series on how to model more of a sheet metal type design. So you'll see that coming up soon. Give us a thumbs up if you like this. If you have any other ideas or topics you'd like to see, throw them in the YouTube comments after this has been published. We always read those, and thank you for attending, and have fun fusioning.